Joining me now is 10-time X Games gold medal champion and skateboarding legend Tony Hawk. Welcome to Full Frame.
All right, thanks for having me.
So at age 14, you get the hand-me-down skateboard and you start saying, you know, years later I'm going to be sitting with Mike Walter talking about my fortune and fame. I'm sure that's not what went through your mind. But
no,
when
well, I got my first skateboard at 10. That's when I thought of it.
I got the number wrong.
That was the epiphany. I was like, one day I'm going to be on the show.
But you didn't have an epiphany, though. I mean, it was
no,
like,
not at all. In fact, I didn't think I was good. I wasn't really. I mean, by all measures, I wasn't proficient at it immediately. But I liked it, and my friends were doing it, and eventually I got invited to go visit the skate park, the local San Diego skate park, with a friend of mine. And when I went there, and I literally saw these guys flying out of empty swimming pools. That was my moment. That was my epiphany, because I want to fly. And I was young enough to not think that was going to be my career. You know what I mean? I was 11 or something,
right,
and so it was
right.
like, oh, I just want to learn how to do that.
But then I think 14 is when you really started hitting it, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, that's when I had reached the top of the amateur ranks, and then I turned pro. But that also wasn't a very monumental thing, because it was like the competitions were so small, the industry was so small, that in order to turn pro, you just tick the pro box on the entry form as opposed to the amateur box. That really was what it was. And so I remembered, like, okay, I'm pro. There was no fanfare to it.
Wow.
And you then, instead of competing for a trophy, you were competing for a $150 first prize.
Now, at some point, and I know you've written a lot about this, that your parents were very supportive and stuff, but I would think as a father, and you're a father now, you would go and you'd see these kids in these pools and doing these crazy things. You'd be like, no, I'm taking my kid home. I want them to do, you know, golf would be easier. They're not going to hurt themselves.
Luckily, I was the youngest of four, and I was much younger than my other siblings. And so my parents were older when I was born, and it was kind of like they'd been through it all already, and it was just like, just go.
You can afford to lose one.
Well, not even that. It was just like whatever makes you happy, go do it. Like we're not going to try to guide. Like, we're too tired of trying to guide these kids. And my sibling grew up in the 70s, so you know, it was a little bit lawless.
So when did you see it? I mean, you know, okay, you tick off the box. I'm a pro now. I'm getting $150. When did you see it really kind of take off? And then, I mean, I've read where by the end of high school, you had enough money to buy a house. So, I mean, at some point, it went from 150 to like...
It did. That happened pretty quickly in the 80s. In the mid-80s, skating had this surgence of popularity. You know, it wasn't just about the skating for then. It was more about the hairstyles and the graphics, and you know, it was just sort of a look. And I think that the aesthetic, the actual skateboarding itself didn't trump the aesthetic of it, and so kids just bought into it because they were trying to look like skaters, so to speak. So it happened very quickly. And when I was 17, actually, I bought my first house. My parents had to co-sign for it because I wasn't legally allowed to buy a house. And so that seemed like, to me, that seemed endless. You know what I mean? Like, I was making six figures, and I was just in high school, and it was like, oh, this is forever. This is my life. And then not more than 3 years later, my income was getting cut by half every month.
Wow. Wow. And then,
because skating died in popularity. Because like I said, it wasn't about the skating, really. It was just more about the culture.
But did you see it, did you kind of, I mean, you never stepped away from it, but did you say to yourself, it's going to have a comeback? I just know it? Or were there times where you're like, ah?
I always thought it would come back, because I always felt, especially in my youth, I always felt like, why don't people pay attention to this? I mean, this is, by all means, it's adrenaline-filled, it's challenging, it's artistic. You know what I mean? It has all these elements of things, like Evel Knievel.
Right.
And I could never figure out, and there was just the stigma that skateboarding was a toy, and you had to quit doing it when you were an adult. That was sort of the attitude towards skating. And then when it kind of died off, I thought, God, it's been through 2 cycles of popularity. It's got to come back. I wasn't going to quit regardless, but that was the time that I decided to start a skateboard company, because I believed it would come back. And it was the right time to, you know, it didn't take many resources to start a company then, because if you wanted to buy the back page of a skate magazine, they're all but giving it to you, because they're scrambling for advertising.
So you got in low and then went on high.
Exactly. And then once it came around, like, we're the back cover of, you know, the biggest skate magazine in the world, like 5 years later. But it was, but to answer your question, there were definitely time in the first like 4 years of our business where I had no idea what we were going to do.
Well, I guess the question is now, do you feel like it gets the respect it deserves? And was it tough going through the period where it wasn't getting that kind of respect?
I think that the attitude towards skating has definitely changed immensely for the better. I mean, it's on TV. Parents encourage it. You know, that's legitimate career. There are legitimate careers, not just as a pro skater, but in the skate industry. And I feel like that whole attitude has changed for the better. But it was weird living through those years of striving for recognition or at least legitimacy. I mean, that was what it was all about for us. It was like, why can't we be accepted the way that baseball players are accepted, basketball players? Like, why is this so much different? And I feel like now, you know, as mainstream as ball and stick sports are, skateboarding is right up there. I mean, it is more kids skate than play Little League. That's just a fact of statistics here. So,
and it's growing globally too. I mean,
and it's growing globally. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely on the rise. Well, it's been big in Europe. It's on the rise in unlikely places, like the Middle East. Afghanistan has a skate program.
What is it?
China.
What's the defining thing? Because I've heard everybody, I mean, some people say it's an art form, some people say it's a sport. I've heard Ben Harper said it's a language, it's a voice. If someone were to ask you to describe it, I mean, would you use all those words or others?
Yeah, I think it's a sport, a lifestyle, and an art form all in one. And some people choose to focus on one aspect more than the other. So I think that some people, it's only an art form. They would never compete or never want to be compared or never even maybe get paid to do it. Some people, it's all a sport. You know what I mean? They train, they compete, they do well. They're all about the sponsors. And so there are these different avenues, but they all blend as one because there is this common, yeah, like Ben said, there's a common language of progression.
It starts, though, back long ago with these surfers who want to surf on concrete, and then it grows. Now, with your foundation, it's in places like Compton and Watts, and it's really, and I've seen the video that's online about Detroit, what it did there, and what it's doing for these kids. It's really remarkable, and it's got to be a great feeling for you. But I mean, when you first started, did you have any idea the impact the foundation could have, and the impact skate parks could have on these kids?
When I first started the foundation, the idea was more to help communities that are trying to get parks going and just to give them the resources to get it done. Do you know what I mean? It was more like hopefully to get the funding into the more needy areas, but really it was just more like, look, we know all the builders, we know all the designers, we know how a skate park works. Ask us how to do it. But I had no idea that we would have such an impact in that. You know, we have helped to fund over 500 skate parks now. We've been going 12 years. We've given away over $5 million. And we are definitely the resource, like the go-to resource for anyone that wants to do a skate park. And that's something I never dreamed of. You know, I never thought we'd have such a far-reaching impact like that. And I really didn't think it would be that kind of those kind of numbers.
So when you go to a place like that, like to Detroit or somewhere where you see this community that's really hurting, I mean, it's just Band-Aids, and then this skate park, which is just a magnet drawing these kids in there. I mean, what's the feeling? Especially given your background, starting out when you did, when you know, skateboarding wasn't all that cool.
To be honest, that's the best. That's the most rewarding thing that I can do. And it's the most validating, is to be able to provide these types of places for these kids who are largely discouraged from doing this thing that they love because they do it in public places, because you know the communities don't understand the value of it, or that it is teaching them self-discipline and self-motivation, and that there are big communities around it. So I learned back then when I started that I have this. Having success in what I'm doing that is considered, new or unorthodox, that I did have a voice and one that I could make change. That's what I learned back then, was that, wow, these people will actually listen to me, maybe, and they've never listened to a skateboarder before, and we can help create change and help to create more facilities.
Let me ask you if you know what the definition of terror is, because I look at some of the stuff you do, and to me that is the definition of terror. And I'm like, and then I know this has to be the truth, and you have to tell me I'm right on this. I know that you're not nailing everything, that you've just got to bust up your knees and your ankles, and I mean everything's. And so, do you know the definition of terror?
Well, I do, but to be honest, anything that I ever try, I approach it with a sense of confidence, and I know that I'm capable because I've learned all these different skills. You know, say there's this one move, but it requires all these different sort of moves together, that I've mastered all the other moves enough that I can make these work together. Or if it's like a big distance or something, when I go approach it, it's like, I know I can do this. I know I have the speed. If you go at those situations with any sense of doubt, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're gonna fail. And if you go at it without really knowing what are the potential outcomes, or if you're just throwing caution to the wind, that's not the way to approach it either. So I know, but you know, I've definitely had moments where I was like, what did I get myself into? Especially like the first time I ever tried to do a full loop ramp. When I had the idea, you know, I knew it was possible. I had Hot Wheels tracks as a kid, you know, make them do the loop, and it was like, that's possible. You know, let's make that happen. And I went to my sponsor at the time, and I was like, we should do this and shoot it. And they're like, yeah, okay, sure, we'll make that happen. And they built it, and then I drove up to where they built it, and I saw it in person. And I was like, this may not be such a good idea. And it was, you know what I mean? It wasn't like, yeah, I'm going to do this. It was like, oh, man, that was probably the most terrifying for me. Because at that point, no one else is going to come to this calling. You know what I mean? No one else is going to step up and go like, well, okay, you don't want to do it. I got this.
Yeah,
no one else wanted to even consider it. And so it was up to me, and I had to figure it out. And I wrecked my shin. I fell from the top onto my shoulder a couple times, and eventually figured it out. But that was one time where it was more like the terror that you would imagine.
So that first cup of coffee in the morning, it's still kind of, you probably get out a little creaky out of the bed.
Yeah, and I still jack my shin all the time.
Oh, look at this. See, oh my gosh. Wow. That was just getting in the car today. Right?
Yeah, right, there you go.
Oh, look at that. Ouch.
Yeah.
And what was the cause of that?
That one was actually, I was jumping out of I was trying to impress this kid that came because he asked if I could do a backflip. And I said, yeah, I can do a flip. I can actually flip off my board onto the top of my ramp. But I misjudged where the railing was on the ramp, and I went too far and hit my shin right on the railing and played it off like I hit it. And then, so like, yeah, that was cool, right? Yeah. Oh.
Jeez. Somehow I have this vision of you at 83 doing a trick and then landing in your wheelchair and then just kind of going back into
that would be the actual end of my career right then.
Let me ask you about the 900. And for people who don't know what that is, talk to me about that competition when you first did it, what it is, and what was, because I know you tried it a couple of times and then you just nailed it and then people went crazy. What was that like? What was that event like?
Well, for sure it was the highlight of my competitive career, but the 900 is basically a 2.5 spin, like 2.5 somersault in midair. And the reason it's 2.5 is because you're going up the ramp forward, and when you come back down the same wall, you're coming back down forward. It had never been done. I had done 720s like almost 15 years prior to that, and never actually tried to spin that extra half turn because there's a whole element of spinning and being blind to your landing that I couldn't overcome. And then I eventually started trying it and tried it for about 3 or 4 years off and on, never completing it, broke my rib, threw my back out, and kind of had given up on it at that point. And then the X Games in San Francisco came around, and they had a best trick event, which was the first of its kind. And it was basically like, you know, usually we did routines, and we had a certain amount of time to do a bunch of tricks together. This was like, best trick, you guys got 20 minutes, and whatever you make, that's what counts. And so I did my best trick up to that point was a varial 720, which is like a 720 spin while spinning your board an extra turn. So that's all I had planned, and I made that early on in the event. So I didn't have anywhere to go from there. That was my best trick. You know, and so I just started trying 900s more for the crowd because it was like, well, this is what I would love to do next, but I've never completed it. And as I was spinning them, something clicked. I started getting consistent with the spin and started thinking, wow, this, I could actually put this back down on the wall. And I started trying to make it. And at that point, when I started trying to make it, I knew that I was either gonna make it that day or I was gonna be taken out in an ambulance. Like, there was no quitting at that point. And it worked. And it was after the time was expired, but I didn't care. I just wanted to make a 900 for once in my life.
And then that feeling when you came down. I mean, and then everybody rushes in and they
yeah,
hug you.
when I actually made it, I didn't believe I had made it until I was on the next wall, and I looked up, and there's the whole crowd and my peers all running at me, and it was like, it's done. It was more like, oh, it's finally done. It wasn't like I did it. It was more like this trick has been accomplished.
Tony Hawk, it's been a delight. Thanks so much for coming in.
All right.